Welcome everybody, and welcome to this second edition of the event series MAGICS Talks. We are delighted to host it here at Uniarts. I just wanted to briefly mention what MAGICS is. So MAGICS is a national infrastructure where we aim to perform cutting-edge research into science, into art, and artistic research. This infrastructure is distributed over 6 Finnish universities. So that will be Aalto University, Tampere University, Turku University of Applied Sciences, Uniarts, the University of Lapland, and Jyväskylä. And with that, I introduce our wonderful moderator for this event, which is Nitin Soni. He is a visiting researcher at Uniarts with a background in computational design. I give the words to you.
Okay, thank you, sir. It's a delight to be here at Uniarts as a visiting researcher, and having been at Aalto, I feel like we are sister schools with different practices and some good exchange that we're trying to foster. So this being the second MAGICS talk, I'm really happy to moderate a discussion with people whose work I adore very much. And it's a very interdisciplinary approach to how we would think about our relationship with technology, the arts, and society, which is going to be very a provocative discussion we'll have today. So we'll be having 3 speakers, and I'll introduce the first one, which is Jan Schaker. He is an artist researcher, an educator, performing on stage in other environments, working through sound, body, and presence. And he's trained as an instrumentalist and composer in the digital arts, and his practice has been shifting to the use of sound as in the ways that it understands the body as a site of action and perception and culture. I won't read his entire bio, you'll find it online, but it's important to note that his works have been situated in very diverse contexts of festivals, music projects, and urban spaces. And he's also been working as an associate researcher at the Zurich University of the Arts on musical gesture, immersive media, and sound. And since 2021, he's been a professor of music and technology here at the Symbiosis Academy. So with that, we'll hear from Jean. Thank you.
Thanks for this introduction. My talk today is going to be on a few fundamental questions that we have to deal with when we work with technologies, with algorithmic systems, with distributed agency. So the first question that I pose, and it's in my abstract, is what is our relation, or the relation of our artwork, when we embrace and get entangled with instruments and systems with autonomy, that have their autonomy to decision-making, with opacity, we don't know what they're doing, and whose affordances, morphologies, and implicit value systems somehow permeate our shaping. Before I begin this exploration, I just want to situate my own work, maybe giving you some glimpses, and here's a short video. Okay, so a few different approaches to mediated space, mediated experience, entangled spaces, entangled bodies, that now are going to give you the background to my more conceptual explorations. So I want to begin by looking at the notions of practice and experience, and also then on the question of paradigm and the data model simulation framework. So if we begin with practice, we can say that being in practice and arguing from practice means that we possess know-how, praxis in Greek as doing action, in relation to theoria thinking and poiesis making. And more radically, practice is the moment when we are inseparably entwined with being present. And it is a precondition for experience, for learning, doing, and making. Experience then is the totality of lived aspects in a moment or situation. Lived perceptions, affect, emotions, cognitive processes, imagery, etc. Experience is also what arises from praxis and is accumulated through repeated adaptive enacting within the world and relation to the environment. Experience, in Bergson's view, is based on representative as well as affective sensation, the former being measurable and the latter being pure quality without reference to an external cause. Experience, finally, is the core outcome of art making, art encountering. The goal of art is experience. The effect of art is experience. We are affected by art. If we now go to the concept of paradigm as developed by Kuhn, it investigates how established systems of theories, methods, instruments, values, and assumptions are disrupted when an anomaly appears in the system. And this anomaly needs to be resolved, and a new frame of reference needs to integrate. So that paradigm, in the narrow sense, is then a consensus on exemplars of good science, or as Stengers puts it, it is how members of scientific disciplines learn to recognize and treat problems. Therefore, a paradigm change is a novel puzzle solution which crystallizes consensus as a model for exemplary science by a community of practice. And I believe that we find ourselves currently at such a junction, at the threshold of agential algorithms and autonomous systems. So if we move to the lower three terms, then in digital arts, we deal with data. And the data are abstract units of information that are structured and homogeneous and allow formalization and operationalization. Data forms the basis for computational approaches to the world, and they go from measurements through instruments to formalized abstractions. For Reinberger, the gesture of transposition seems to be common to all scientific practices. Transposition means that things are taken out of a given context, their normal embedding or use, and are placed in a context that allows us to look at or process them for epistemological purposes. So that includes observation, classification, quantification, isolation, purification, analysis, and synthesis. The next step in the abstraction processes are models. And models describe an abstract or hypothetical behavior or phenomenon. And they make complex configurations apprehensible, comprehensible, at the expense of reduction and abstractions. So models are based on an ontological cut to the phenomena in question, says Reinberger. Models can be purely formal, schematic, or diagrammatic in nature. And of course, making models corresponds to the divide and conquer approach in scientific methods, but it is also a fundamental human cognitive trait. So compared to the feats of perception and consciousness, where we model the world, the abstraction levels achieved in conceptual or computational models still suffer from the ontological cut that detaches them from the lived experience. In science, the abstract model's primary role is representation or perhaps speculation. So a representation as a second order representation, or a speculation in the sense of testing potential configuration of elements. From that, we can then jump to what we would call simulation, which conventionally serves a specific function, which is replacing or anticipating or validating situations, configurations, or behaviors. And of course, in digital arts, we are mainly concerned with digital representation processes. But it could be argued that these simulations that the digital processes are based on, they extend our mode of doing art and the social exchange as well. To come back to Reinberger last time, he states, and that I find really interesting, that simulations are qualitatively different from concept or models. Because simulations are characterized by a precession, a projection forward, an antecedence to the model. Okay, so here are a few models from my own practice, and I'm not going to discuss them in detail. This is one mapping some body types from a performance perspective. And this is one looking at types of research. And what those two maps actually show is that it's an organization of elements, putting in relationship and hierarchization of elements, and providing a way of reading or interpreting relationships between elements. But of course, these are abstractions or reductions. They are also part of exploration processes, where we look for potentially constitutive relationships between the elements. And in our case, between the elements in artistic creation and performance, or about an artistic research apparatus. And in particular, when working with mediated experiences that are based on models and simulations, the suspension of disbelief or projection is necessary. And this informs fundamentally the experience, the inner states. It also informs the sense of self and existence and the feeling of difference between us and others, or us and our environment. And these get intertwined in a very complex and, let's say, undivisible complexity or manifold. This means that we are operating in digital arts often based on a measurement modeling simulation approach. That comes from a paradigmatic framework from the sciences. And this framework, of course, permeates our culture more and more in its presence in entertainment design and even in political or economical decision making. In artistic research about digital arts, our intent then might be to argue from a position that is against this type of materialism. But we need to take into account that we assign agency to non-human factors, such as the medium, the instrument, the body-object space, a framing through scenography or performance situations. So at the same time as we negotiate these entanglements, we also need to question the impact of using these digital simulations on our perceptual presence and our entanglement with virtual, invisible, non-human agents. So to the question on agency or authorship of agentic machines, we have to think about how intentions, decisions, delegations, and maybe dwelling in a cyborg body constitutes our artistic selves and identities. And I think to some extent, even our normal selves in our technically permeated society. And then the question is, what are the role of aesthetic sensorial choices that are shifted, decentered, detached, abstracted when we start working in symbiotic entanglement with algorithmic systems? So let's consider those two perspectives about the prosthetic and the symbiotic entanglement. Stefansdottir proposes with Lucy Suchman that agency cannot be seen as something that exists only in the object or in the performer, which would be a very kind of one-to-one mapping, but rather as a relational phenomenon that emerges in the interaction. So with agentic instruments and autonomous algorithms, authorship and decision-making get distributed and shaped into a kind of alternate sociality that needs to be explored through hybrid intentionalities. On this diagram, we have a series of terms. There are actually two fields here. The top line is an interesting one because it's the beginning of a mapping of the intertwining with digital processes or algorithms that have autonomy. Of course, this is just the beginning of the alphabet. So the apparatus, the agency, affect, autonomy, aesthetics, we could keep going with numerous and probably uncountable aspects of this entwining. On the main diagram below, I'm juxtaposing data and experience on the inside, which is what I was doing in the beginning of this talk. But this field now, when we deal with digital arts and we deal with autonomous system, is now framed by aspects of symbiotic and prosthetic states. And this is where we encounter the paradox between the singularity of an artwork that is anchored in experience and the superimposed intentionalities or dependencies with digital instruments, with software tools, and with algorithmic co-agents. If we zoom out, we could maybe say that we have a model for creation and performance that is framed by digital systems that have algorithmic autonomy, but they rely on prosthesis, symbiosis, and simulation. But at the core of our artistic abilities, we maintain speculation and imagination as fundamental processes. These are our innate drivers for creation, and they inform our ability to seize a decisive moment. So that's denoted by the kairos, to be able to decide in a performance and jump. However, if we get increasingly dependent on algorithmic prosthetics, these abilities are progressively replaced by a retrospective reactivation of models that are a representation of previously lived moments, decisions, sensations, and above all, a reactivation of relationships. So with autonomous systems, instruments with own decision-making, we come into a symbiotic dependence that is based on retrospective design in an adaptive loop where expression and aesthetic forms merge with representation, the distributed intention, volition, and control. And to come back to our initial question about autonomy, opacity, and the pervasive impacts, I think we are asked to develop an acute awareness of the forces of distributed agency, particularly when the algorithms and the technical arrangements we use become increasingly opaque. And to balance these processes of crafting interdependent assemblages in symbiotic relations, the modes of imagination and speculation in artistic practices are what enable future-looking risk-taking without forgetting risk mitigation strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I think, are we going to introduce the next speaker, or do we? Yes.
Shall I sit here?
Okay. So I'm going to now introduce Hanna Peala-Assefa, who is a cross-media choreographer and doctoral candidate in the Performing Arts Research Center here. And her doctoral thesis is on digital choreography, investigating dance and choreographic practices that are mediating interactive performance environments. And her longer artistic practice in contemporary dance, choreography, film, new media technologies underpins this research practice that she's been developing with an extended focus on post-human improvisation. So I'll let Hannah tell us more about that. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to talk to you here. I'll put my presentation here. Yes, good. So, thank you, Jan, for that wonderful talk. So my talk is going to be more precisely about the actual practice, this kind of practice, and giving an example in the area of digital choreography. So I talk about my current research on the topic and reflect a bit on how an interactive performance may create social resonance. Short overview. So I will talk about what I mean by digital choreography, then discuss a bit about my framework and the practice of creating performative systems as choreography, and then I go into the topic of resonance through a case example of my work. So digital choreography, I consider, is the creation of an emergent performance with interactive technology. By emergent performance, I mean a performance that is coming into being, materialized through improvisation, that is the doing of a performance with interactive technology that involves the setting up of these performative conditions and the digital system where the performer's movement is being captured by some device as data, which is then computed, causally mapped with other aesthetic materials, what Jan referred as the model, and which is then projected in real time to the space as simulations. So the elements of the performance are being created and perceived in real time by the improvising performer. This constitutes an interface for performing, a performative choreographic system that gives agency of mattering for the performer. My frame is to work with participatory audience, singular or plural participants. And then the composition involves, of course, the choreographic system, the interactive and performative circumstances, which in my case, I'm giving agency for the participating audience to generate the aesthetic material through movement improvisation. And improvisation here is important. It's a key factor in my work. It is, to me, it's situational because it is a time-based performance, a real-time improvisatory, interactive situation with sound and moving images. The audience members then become active performers of the performance. There is no separate audience watching this interaction with the material. And in making, I have to think about the staging of the agency and the performative matter and how to set up the situation for the audience, to prepare them and to sensitize them for interacting with this digital medium. Technically, then it involves, of course, the apparatus design, how the interactive system operates, what do they have agency on, and how do they interact and generate the matter? What is the interface that they're working with? I'm thinking about how to capture the movement, how to compute it, what are the aesthetics of the material. And in my case, it's sound and moving non-representational images. I put intentionally effort on sound, and meaning sonic interaction, because that is giving leeway or leaning into this corporeal listening and supporting this corporeal listening of the sonic environment and how it affects the compositional task of improvising. The created feedback loop intensifies and guides the perception of moving and being in the space. The interactions with the sound are prompting corporeal awareness and open exploration of the interface and the sonic environment, creating this kind of non-verbal, affective, digital score for the improvisation. The performance is therefore not about representation in any way. The focus is on performing and how the performance comes into being. The performance is therefore an interactive entity, an event, and a phenomena which emerges from its active components, the performers and the system. Therefore, mind theoretical framework involves with post-human questions of relational mattering with others as human and non-human. Mattering, as Rosi Braidotti and Karen Barad argues, mattering matters in this frame. It is also bringing forth the ethical dimensions of relationality and resonant co-constitutive social ethics. So I talk a little bit about my artistic component, the sonic organism, and how I investigated the practice of making, or not talk about the, but I do in my research investigate the practice of making choreography through this making of art. The sonic organism artwork manifests resonant relationships between participants. They are set as equal improvising performing agents, and therefore as responsible partners in creating the world and making sense of it, which requires physical, cognitive, and emotional investment. The ethical commitment is exceptionally strong, as the expressive agency gives them all a sonorous presence, which is self-resonant. The space is about listening to resonant bodies in a resonant environment. This is a complicated slide, but I give a small point about this, a short view into the data computation in the sonic organism and how it connects to meaning making. The movement data here from the dancers on top is collected as raw data and organized as a general mass of movement in space. We could call it movement energy or the vitality of the body, the ability to move in endless combinations. The data parameterization is not using the human anatomical body, the skeletal frame, as the standard computation framework. Therefore, the conceptual base for sonification is not based on gestures, body parts, or the usual interaction causalities of normalized bodies. Rather, the relations with the vital body between bodies and the interrelations with the material space. Therefore, the framework allows new ways of mapping movement to generate materials, a kind of queering of interaction. The causalities are not self-evident and not based on familiar gestures. Therefore, the languages of movement are not pre-signified. And new meanings can then emerge from the practice. And how to think of resonance, or how is resonance sort of really relevant in this frame? Of course, resonance is a physical phenomena. As sound, acoustic sound resonates in the space. The sound waves are resonating in our bodies, in our flesh, in our liquids, and our bodies resonate in movement. Bodies also communicate. They transfer messages, ideas, or experiences and resonate with each other when they connect bodily, emotionally, cognitively, and when making sense of the space together. I reflect this artwork and the concept of resonance through a German social science theorist, Hartmut Rosa, and his social resonance theory. What he describes, where he describes resonance as a responsive and transformative relationship between individuals and the world. He says that it's not merely an echo, but a dynamic interaction where both sides influence each other. Rosa identifies different axes of resonance. This horizontal axis between human beings, a diagonal axis between humans and objects or material, and a vertical axis as emotional, expressive, intellectual, or transformative resonance. But I also claim that in these kind of emergent environments, there's also ethical and political. There's also an ethical and political space of resonance. When we engage in improvisation with others, other agents that are also figuring out their own language and their understanding of the space, we create a democratic space of communication and creation. That this shift of agency, of creative agency, is a political act of democratizing performative agency. Okay, sorry, I forgot to show that quote. Okay, I talk a little bit about how we did in practice and thought about practice of these sonifications and how this made, and then kind of relate that or think about it through this Rosa's resonant theory. So doing these sonifications and thinking about interactivity, one of the sort of key frameworks is the agency. How do we give agency? So for the singular body, we detect a movement cluster as one individual and assign a sound to them, creating their agency of actualizing sounds through movement. This singular agency of sound creates an individual dynamic relationality with the world. It is a resonance on this diagonal axis between human and material. Of course, this agency needs to be explored and practiced. It requires acting upon the desire to move in one's own way and in one's style, and exploring the creation of sound, which then, when recognized, constitutes a sound signature and becomes their voice. This requires attentive listening, attending to details of one movement and the sound, noticing how I make sounds and how the sounds affect me. It is not just about having power over the creation and doing something or making an effect. It's about noticing how I interact in the world and how does that affect me. Jean-Luc Nancy writes beautifully about this listening as an opening towards the registers of the sonorous that allows for accessing the self. In this frame, it's not merely a metaphor, but really a reality. The second framework comes with multiple people in the space with this sonic agency. And then, therefore, sorry, I'm not somehow accessing my notes. So when there's more persons in the space, there is also the intersubjectivity, the horizontal resonance between humans with their voices. I'm having a dialogue between my voice and their voice, a relationship with my fellow humans and the material conditions of the environment. And this is constituting a moral space with ethical implications, because perceptually, we are creating a shared soundscape, a resonance of bodies and materials. Your agency gives you power over the shared space. With that comes an ethical responsibility of that world. In a performance, I care about the common sound field. I give space for others to play with their sounds and to communicate with them. I give a little sample from the work. Good. So, but we also created more complex sonification frameworks between the agents. And that meant that we still have the singular agents with their own sound ideas as sound signatures. But then we also have a different sound map to the proximity. And this becomes the motivator of exploring the spatial relationalities of bodies. This sound feature brings forth an effective and cognitive resonant relationship with others, emphasizing our bodily relations, mirroring, synchronizing movement, countering, responding, exploring spatial and temporal relations. We begin organizing the time and space, and choreography starts to emerge. Then a different or another sound feature that we introduced is with bodies in intimate space, where the bodies close to each other cluster and emerge one entity. There's a new intimate element of relationality, closeness, relatedness, synchrony, kinesthetic empathy. That is emphasized by the harmonious melodic quality of the sound material. Rosa claims that the vibrations of two people in resonant relationship can mutually reinforce each other. Their amplitude is growing even larger. And then again, as all sounds mixed perceptually as one soundscape, this is creating relational bodies and sounds in the social space. And all these different sound mappings result in a mix of multiple sonic features, of which some are individual and some are relational. This playing with the multiple potential variations of social and sonic relations, the horizontal and diagonal resonance becomes the driving performative force. We create the world together. At this stage, the individual agency becomes often a little bit blurred, and the social features become perceptually dominant. But we still have our post-human subjectivity. As Braidotti states, we are all in this together, but not as one and the same. This social play, of course, is voluntary and it's not forced, but emerges out of a desire for listening and connection with the world as social resonance. And again, a little example of how this happens in practice. So, with this improvisational sonified environment, the aim is to allow and support relational resonant coexistence and creation. My early analysis definitely imply a strong social ontological beingness on Rosa's horizontal axis of resonance between human beings. On the diagonal axis, there is the resonance between material objects and humans, as it is a purposeful practice of mattering the sound and the resonating ongoing bodily practice of moving. There is a constant bodily negotiation going on with the sound. The sound as a perceived material object with its own voice, the qualities of the sound, and the sound as an extension of the body. They both create meaning and therefore are meaningful. This is due to the human actor's capacity to define their place in the world by constructing and reconstructing both the material and the symbolic conditions of their existence. On this third vertical axis, there is the resonance on the level of art and the aesthetic expressivity. As we have a longing for something with emotional and aesthetic value, ontologically transcendental as the meaning is shaped by the non-distinct and non-verbal improvisational expression. The world and its known meaning can be redefined and challenged. So therefore, I do claim that this kind of interactive performative practice allows a very specific kind of social resonance that allows a hedonistic pleasure, yes, but it is also ethically affirmative, a place for empowerment through agency with a strong sense of reflexive connections with the world and the others in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanna. And we will now invite our final speaker, Vincent Romanac. He is a Basque French artist and researcher based here, postdoc researcher based here in Helsinki. And he's been working in his artistic realm in theater and directing, but has since kind of shifted these modes of production in the more urgent climate and technological realm. So his work is quite vast, consisting of installation work, video, performing arts, and I'm not going to go into the wide body of work, but I think what's important is that he's been testing this notion of ecologizing theater. And I'd like to see the ways that he's going to talk about that in his work, and you'll see that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nitin, for the introduction. And thank you, Hanna and Jan, for inspiring presentations. Let's go. Good afternoon, everyone, here on site and online, and the ones in the future watching the recording. And thank you, Tor and MAGICS Talks, for the invitation. My presentation is titled 12 Techno-Ecodramaturgical Scenes, Redirecting Theatre Through Hybrid Environments. The 12 works, or scenes, I will too rapidly pecha-kucha after this introduction, are part of a long-term artistic research trajectory that began with my doctoral project Reacclimating the Stage, continued through my postdoctoral project Data Ocean Theatre, and now continues within my new project Stages of Flower Powers. Together, these projects aim to redirect or re-ecologize Western theatre to shift its conceptual, relational, and material orientation away from anthropocentric staging towards what I call a stage as milieu, in contrast to a stage as an exclusively human center and control. By redirecting, I do not mean abandoning theatre and drama, but altering their coordinates, their sense of space, scale, agency and temporality, while also redirecting myself as a theatre director. Rather than a centripetal perspectivist stage where humans represent the world in the box, these works reopen the notion of practice and practice of stage, establishing simultaneous, hybrid, complex environments where human, technological and biospheric presences co-compose multiscalar and multitemporal performances. I call this process techno-ecodramaturgical, drawing on Theresa May's ecodramaturgy, theatre centered on ecological concerns and responsibilities, and Yvonne Volkart's techno-ecofeminism. The work engages with international movements exploring theatre ecology, post-humanist performance, and multi-species collaboration. and closer here in Uniarts Helsinki with pioneers in artistic research on theatre and ecology like Anette Alander, Tuija Kokkonen, and or Esak Kirkko-Pelto. A precision here, ecology is not reduced as often to an environmental justice understanding, nor treated as a topic to be addressed through the persistence of inherited modes of thinking, making, sharing, but instead is addressed as an infrastructural, ontological, scenographic, and dramaturgical encompassing condition, where the human, the biotope, and technology act as co-makers and co-performing bodies. This practice moves between artistic research, directing, scenography, ecosophy, within a chosen critical, low-tech aesthetic orientation. Now the 12 scenes. Scene 1, Hamlet, the rest is silence. During the tragic pandemic, in a locked-down black box theatre, a fallen curtain and screen formed an installation into which overlapping snowstorm and white noise footage were projected. Streamed for 24 hours, the work functioned as a remote, live broadcast performance without human actors and with contingent spectators. The video doesn't work. It will. Scene 2, Summer Morning in Epidaurus, GIF, or GIF. Summer Morning in Epidaurus, GIF, installed on public bleachers in Helsinki, looped a short GIF made of footage filmed at the ancient theatre of Epidaurus during a 2022 heatwave. Displayed within a contemporary amphitheatre, it juxtaposed the monumental empty ruins of ancient theatre with today's urban public stage through low-tech poetics and wind. Scene 3, Yasukuni. A video of no stage in Tokyo and the typhoon rain captures the Kagami-Ita pine back wall amid rehearsal activity. Meteorological conditions, cultural practice and a technical editing mistake resulting in an expected algorithmic glitch turns the stage into entanglement. Scene 4, Reacclimatizations. Across 6 sites, Barcelona, Mustarinda, Finland, Prague, Tokyo, Helsinki and Turku, archival Western theatre set models, computational media, GIFs, and flowers were recomposed to revisit floral Western theatre scenography history, re-examining agencies and meditating on the coexistence of biological, historical, and technological systems of representation and perception. Scene 5, Data Ocean Theatre, Tragedy and the Goddesses, Stasimon. 12 faux ceramic masks crafted from Baltic Sea scientific research data prints form a tragic chorus. A looping polyphonic soundscape from broken hard drives is displayed from within, an oceanic lament as data opera or hardware tragedy. Scene 6, Data Ocean Theatre, Gobo. Again, during the COVID crisis, I commissioned a custom gobo, a theatre light metal filter etched with an isohedral tiling pattern used to create 3D texture for computational design resembling sea waves. One March evening, I projected it from my balcony onto the melting Baltic Sea, connecting geometric pattern, light and water, superstudio superficie, or continuous movement. Scene 7, Data Ocean Theatre, Scenography. Miniature reconstructions of historical sea machines for theatres, from Nicola Sabatini columns to Steel Mackey's wave machine, animated water in a bathtub. Data from the reports were modeled and 3D printed as scenography number 1. Scene 8, Data Ocean Theatre, All the Sea is the Sea, in collaboration with Sophie Rodriguez and Laurent Joly. On the rocky shores of Suomenlinna in Helsinki, 2 actors in period costumes recited sea themes excerpts from Western plays with the sea as a backdrop. Their voices mingled with wind and underwater sounds, framed like a 19th century seascape painting, performed with digital tablets held by lazy neck device and live hydrophone recordings from underwater. Scene 9, Data Ocean Theatre, Ikuturso, in collaboration with O Condit. On the Baltic Sea, above the Sea Lion submarine data cable, an actor, O Condit, floated in diving gear while I directed them remotely via satellite communication. The one-shot scene replaying the archetypal director-actor pair intertwined mythology, data infrastructure, and sea performance for sea performance, filmed by drone and body camera. Then I'll say my lines. I am swimming. should reach the coordinate stage. Now I should be alive. Scene 10, Stages of Flower Powers, Ophel AI. At Francilla Organic Farm, AI-generated Ophelia's voice looped alongside Ikebana arrangements. Her algorithmically remixed flower monologue intertwined ancestral floral knowledge with ambiguous digital reinterpretation.
Rosemary nodes in optic thread, silver frayed where dream is bled. Remember me, remember this, the backup heart, the phantom kiss.
Scene 11, Stages of Flower Powers, Tokonoma Series 1, Sombre Bloom, in collaboration with Jérôme Alavena. A tokonoma is a small alcove within a traditional Japanese home that serves as a stage for showcasing calligraphy, ikebana, and precious crafted objects. The tokonoma is reinterpreted here as a hybrid stage of live and artificial irises, a decomposed flower painting, and a looping half-human, half-AI-generated poem GIF. Scene 12, Stages of Flower Powers Garden Theatre Prototype. In collaboration with the Museum of Scenic Arts of Barcelona, Garden Theatre reimagines late 19th century floral scenography through AI-generated reinterpretation and live flowers, transforming the black box into a hybrid garden. This is a prototype and a simulation. The work will be realized, hopefully, in 2027. Two, from stage to milieu. Across these 12 scenes, 3 operational principles recur: stage as milieu, technology as co-body, and dramaturgy as reacclimatization. Traditional theatre frames stage as a bounded site of control and visibility. Here, it becomes milieu, a generative ecology resisting binaries of nature, culture, subject, object, human, non-human, here, there, now, then. Informed by Felix Guattari ecosophy, 3 ecologies, chaosmosis, as well as on object-oriented ontologies and new materialism, which have accompanied the transformation of our artistic practices within the acknowledgement of the Anthropocene over the past 10 years, the stage emerges as a dynamic field of interdependence where theatre fluctuates as co-constitutive environment, not representational, homochronic, monofocal, observatory. While theatre studies often position technology as prosthetic, an extension of human technique, an external tool, a supplement for enhancing or expanding spectacle, I am approaching it ontologically as an already embedded participant in the dramaturgical event. Following Martina Leker's observation that digital cultures are performative cultures, that cultures are and technologies are inseparable and constantly and mutually influencing each other, technology here operates as a co-body, as co-constitutive presence within the performative ecology of stage as milieu. With more time, I could also reflect here on Yuku's notion of cosmotechnics, where technology is understood not as an autonomous system of instruments, but as a mode of worlding, inseparable from the ecological conditions in which it emerges. The techno-ecodramaturgically redirect theatre, then, is to attune to these co-performances, to allow the technological assemblage to disclose its affective, material, and ecological presence, welcoming the risks of disruption, latency, or breakdown as dramaturgical potential. Within this conceptual framework, low-tech strategies, GIFs, handcrafted data, transpositions, mobile phone interfaces, or simple streaming devices are concretely and critically implemented as resistances to the economy of high-tech spectacle. They foreground interdependence over addition, embeddedness over complementarity, privileging immediacy and relational presence over display. They also echo the gestures of arte povera and minimalism, where reduction, everyday materiality, and process supplanted technological monumentality. The mimetic principle of theatre is thus reactivated not through illusion, but through shared technicity, making perceptible the daily entanglement of human biospheric beings and machinic bodies within the renewed ecology of the contemporary stage. If climate change is a crisis of relationality, techno-ecodramaturgy offers methods of reacclimating, learning to dwell and react within shifting conditions. Each project tests how re-ecologized theatre can function as a sensorium of transition, registering hybrid fluctuations of weather, data, memory, and bodies. And when I say body, and once for all, I do not refer to an essentialized human body, but to complex, hybrid, enmeshed human bodies with non-human components, characteristics, and chorisms. It seeks not to represent crisis, but to inhabit it materially, transforming it into symbiotic attention rather than spectacle. To conclude, and to come back to the three umbrella terms of our talks today, symbiosis refers here not only to biological cohabitation, but to intermaterial negotiation, including technological, artificial, and synthetic matters and beings, a way of building dramaturgies of coexistence that refuse singular dominant agency. Resonance operates here as both acoustic and epistemic principle. In many scenes, literally, sound, wind, data hum, hard drive lament serves as connective tissue between media and environments. Resonance implies that meaning is not transmitted but vibrates between entities, producing multi-channel fields of attention. And finally, mattering concerns the ethical dimensions of these entanglements. Matter, organic or artificial, is performative, always, already. It enacts and is enacted. Thank you, Karen Barad. To redirect theatre, then, is to let bio and tech matter participate in dramaturgical decision-making. Once, landscape was painted on the backdrop of the theatre. That stormy landscape has now entered the stage as real storm, and therefore transformed it as heterogeneous matter in the leading role, doubling itself with its contemporary stormy counterpart, the digital, algorithmic, computational, immersive tempest. To rephrase Aalto, the backdrop and its double, therefore. Thus, the question is not what theatre should represent, but how it can respond to changing climates, infrastructures, and ontologies. Directing becomes redirecting, redistribution of labor, perception, resources, attention, and time. The stage activates as a transitory, more than human ecosystem, queering inherited notions of directing, acting, and spectatorship. Yet, this shift also resists the temptation of holistic continuity and guilt-driven withdrawal of human specificity and responsibility. The real challenge lies in navigating tensions and paradoxes between control and letting go, between individual expertise and collective intelligence, including environment and artificial intelligences, between aesthetic choices and contingency, and in our tech-oriented context today, between human ethical framing and silly colonized regimes of truth. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to invite all of our speakers on stage, and I will also maybe grab another chair so we can all be here together. Is there? Yeah. Great. Please come join us, Vincent. Yes. I'm really, really delighted to be a part of this conversation, and maybe just some opening remarks, because it's such a great collection of practices and conceptual thinking that we brought together in this context. And clearly it has to do with how we relate to notions of performance and theater in a technologized, digitalized context. And I think we have to stretch the boundaries of what we mean by performance, as Vincent was also trying to push us to do. But maybe I'll kind of just start with some of the key things that we heard, just to remind us about the trajectory of presentations we've had. Jan was talking about how we think of ourselves as entangled bodies in dealing with mediated spaces. And here, the kind of data model simulation framework he's been conceptualizing offers a kind of computational way to think, to consider how we engage with digital technologies in that context, and how it helps us create these gestures of transposition and these models that we have inherently as human traits can also emerge through a computational process that, through simulation, then offer another a way of understanding what's going on. So this entanglement that he proposed in these virtual environments that involve sometimes agentic systems we interact with, or sometimes we ourselves are embodying some kind of cyborg presence, helps us think about what is the kind of relational agency we have in a digital environment. When we create these instrumentations, digital systems, what does it offer in this combination of symbiosis, prosthesis, and simulation? So it's a very rich set of conceptual ideas, and of course it was really great to see at least some examples of the work you've done. And this is where Hannah and her dissertation work, I think, became crucial, because she's talking about how we think of digital choreography and the notion of resonance in these emergent practices, and in this participatory ways that she's trying to engage with sonorous organisms, as she said, querying the ways that we engage with sound and body in these spaces. How do these interactions, not just the bodily movement, but the interactions themselves, create a kind of resonance? And how can we amplify the resonance through this intimacy of performing and improvising? And kind of coming to Vincent, I was really keen to see that we move beyond the stage and the kind of theatrical space we typically inhabit when we think of performance, to the wider ecological domain. A lot of his works, while they use some kind of algorithmic computational tools, he of course calls many of them low-tech. In many cases, they're modeling our geophysical environments and bringing them into the stage, where the ecology and the landscape, as you said, goes from foreground to an active agent in that space and co-constructing the performance or theatrical possibility. So this kind of notion of the ecology being generative and helping through this notion of cosmotechnics, that it has some sort of ecological agency, is something we haven't thought enough about in the kind of digital realm. So I kind of wanted to help us think about what does it mean to be engaged in performance today? How do we reflect on the deep tradition of performance and theater in the ways that we reconceptualize performance? What is the role of computational systems in performance? Is it superficial? Is it truly helping us make sense of the world differently? Is it offering a different agency, or is it an agency we've created that we're simply using to amplify our own agency? So these are important questions, and it's really crucial also to think about what does it mean to be performing at the scale and temporal span of planetary systems, because we think of performance as something having a beginning and end in a stage, in a research agenda that we might do over a couple of weeks or months. But planetary phenomena are multi-scalar, and how do we even think about the kind of performance we're doing with the ecological systems that are much wider? So if you really want to think about the non-human and going away from the anthropocentric approaches to performance and theater, what does it mean to engage the planetary realm, which opens up lots of other questions? And then what does it mean to think of simulation modeling and the aspects Jan brought up that go beyond the stage to our wider world? So I think I want to pause there just so that we could unpack a number of these concepts, because there was so much here that we covered in less than an hour. I was still trying to sort of make sense of it all. But let's pause with that and maybe ask you to reflect on your own work and each other's work, and what you think, how you think it's affecting your artistic practices now, both the conceptual and the technological realm that you're exploring. Shall we start with you, Jan?
Yeah, thanks, Nitin, for kind of giving us a frame again to join these diverging practices still together, no? Because we're not the same. To me, what I think is interesting, if, as you said, if we extend, we go beyond the stage. And I was referring to maybe just the state of our society, basically, our highly technologized ways of relating, mediated ways of relating. I'm thinking that as artists, of course, we are the ones who can speculate and dream or twist to bring to the foreground certain dynamisms, maybe, that we are subjected to normally and don't really reflect on, or don't realize how much influence and how much outside influence is exerted on us through inherited biases, value systems, technical systems, ways of doing. So I think it's really interesting with Vincent's restaging, so this re-movement, now that you were also kind of resonating with me. I mean, we have this double step, or, you know, it's a two-step kind of thing, because we're still dealing with the primary being, state of being, but we're also kind of referring to a transformed, reframed or recontextualized or decontextualized way of working, which I also see in Hanna's work, that the choreography is now has a different meaning. It's not prescriptive on the movement, it's actually generative on the relational. And I think that's an ecological dimension right there, no?
Yeah. Hanna?
Yeah, thank you, Nitin, for...
Yeah.
Do you want to...
No, go ahead.
To do yeah, thank you for the synthesis. Just to reflect on the kind of our simultaneous presentations, converging and diverging. I think for me, what I recognize as a question, as a shared question between the three of us, and is how, as an artist, to inhabit the paradoxical simultaneity of symbiosis and prosthesis. And I think this is really challenging. Like, if, in my case, we know what has happened to the theatre architecture in the Western history. In the first place, we had ancient Greek theatre, which was contemporary at the time, fully open to landscape and cosmos. Then what Roman theatre did is to put a wall in the back wall to focus attention on the stage. And then later, what Renaissance and later on has done is to put a roof to keep dry, but also just to enhance the perspective of the assembly of spectators onto the main agency that was the human on the stage. And it became that humanist art per excellence that it was not in the first place. So I think, and then the director and the artist has got the task to control this apparatus and this centripetal tool of our technique or technology. So this prosthesis. But when we have decided to take the roof away, to take the back wall away, and to kind of consider cosmos, weather, and then we realize that the landscape that was painted on the backdrop is doubled with another environment, which is the so-called immaterial or invisible digital algorithmic computational environment. Then the task has become to deal with being all agents together to make something called performance to happen. So, but yet, and still, I think when I try to bring in my presentation is that as an artist, I still feel the responsibility and somehow if not the final cut, because there's a lot of contingency and chance and randomness involved, but yet to at some point to decide to present something and to open it to contingent or real spectatorship. So there is this kind of like really strong tension between, I say, controlling the processes and letting go within the symbiosis, which is really, for me, the most challenging. And I've maybe recognized that having the happy challenge about it. Sometimes not that happy, but yeah, I don't know if you relate to that.
Would you like to reflect on?
Yeah, I do relate. I think in my practice, what I think the kind of the main shift have been really this kind of positioning my choreographic power or my artistic power, that I'm sort of trying to learn new practices and think of new ways of operating as an artist in a way that how can I actually then distribute the agency, the creative agency, out from myself. And I think looking at technologies from that perspective has helped me. And in that sense, I'm kind of looking at technologies as a tool in a way, that how do I use them and somehow find means to facilitate and make it easier for people who are maybe not used to performing, taking this stage, let's say, that I try to sort of facilitate that option and make that easier and possible, and make that attention shift on how do we understand the knowledge generation within ourselves. And I think that has been my kind of like main driving force. And then like thinking about the research, I think what becomes interesting to me is how this my knowledge generation becomes really important in understanding and really kind of going into quite nitty-gritty details about that practice, like how to make that practice sort of understandable and visible also for the participants.
Yeah.
That is very transparent, that I'm transparent with the use of technology and the sort of the transmission of agency.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell us about this notion of resonance for you, because one can imagine resonance happens when it's not even digitally mediated, right? We can imagine improvisation in a jazz context, and there's a resonance emerging between the musicians at a moment. They're kind of in sync, and they're sensing each other. They are modeling their rhythms in a kind of resonance. We can imagine when children play games, and I saw a really good exhibit in Cologne about how children make up games, and the games have all of this tactile sensory phenomena, and then they come into a resonance where they're kind of flowing in it together in this imaginative speculative world. And so the question for us is, what does digital technology do to create a different kind of resonance? Does it help us break out of a certain way that we are make us uncomfortable, or create new spaces of resonance that haven't existed? So maybe we could reflect on that, because it's quite often that we start with the digital, and then we think that we should be able to get people to use that to amplify a certain kind of interaction. But what happens when we begin with more embodied physical interactions and spatial interactions, and then figure out where the digital actor plays a role, and does it create a different kind of resonance?
Well, I think reflecting the Rosa's theory of social resonance for me was this kind of like an exercise of looking at my practice in that sense, because there is resonance happening in many situations. And like you said, in improvisation, it's all about resonance, like resonant bodies and using different techniques and different sort of skills of resonating with each other and creating a shared expressive space. And of course, that happens without the technology. And we can improvise, bodies can improvise and make sound without the technology. And my outlook on that with the tech is actually then that I think it makes us a little bit, because it's a strange environment, because it's something that we need to learn how to use the interface, that it's not familiar, that we are not familiar with. Then it sort of intensifies this perceptive space that because we are not comfortable, we are not skilled yet in using it. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of emphasizes our ability to accommodate the spaces together and kind of align as human beings together, like figuring out what is this world. So then that sort of amplifies the resonance between us, mm-hmm. because we are there sort of figuring out the resonance with the material things that the technology sort of enables us to do in that particular space. Okay. So I think it's not creating new resonances, it's just allowing us to be more perceptive of the resonances that are already happening.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe I'll ask Jan then to bring your data model simulation framework. Do you see that framework as a way of understanding how we make sense of performance? Is it a way of developing new kinds of performances? Is in the simulation a different kind of symbiosis happening that you can then model differently? What for you is the, I guess, the most valuable thing about the modeling and simulation dimension of engaging in performance?
Well, I have a problem with setting up these dichotomies. And Hanna, you were referring to this making strange as a process that we artists use. To me, I think the data model simulation framework is something we inherit, which is carried in all of our digital tools. It's not something we construct actively, but it's a constituent part of using these processes and algorithms that allow us to do, representations so I think the real negotiation is between the experiential domain or the intrapersonal, intersubjective resonance domain and these systems that are predicated on a completely different perspective because they're fundamentally originally laboratory setups that we have expanded to create art with. So that's why I'm thinking of these entities then, what are their agencies? And I'm very much with Vincent that they are co-actors or they're co-bodies. They are in our everyday life. If we think of our screen lives, they are constituting our life to, that maybe these two realities are overlaid over each other. And I think the same is true for practices with algorithmic systems. And I'm not saying only performative practices. I think the other arts, the same thing happens. So then I had a metaphor for a long time. I'm going to propose this, that technology, if we don't objectify, but we put it in some kind of a relational field, or maybe, it's a mirror. Maybe we're narcissistic. It's actually a narcissistic mirror, but it's a fractured mirror, meaning that what comes back is transformed or is fragmentized. And that prohibits, for example, the natural empathetic relationships that resonance generate. But for artists, this, how to say, what's the attraction of working in these kind of detaching or fragmentizing configurations, is that it allows us to perceive or to create configurations that create a new sensation or a new sense or a new relation. I'm thinking of the restagings in other environments. I mean, it decenters, it shifts. We have a new perspective on maybe familiar materials.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this, let's say the technical framework and this technical paradigm that is at the basis of our tools enables us to decenter to a certain amount of degree, but we need to stay aware that there's the experiential domain, which is not modelism, which is not a simulation, which is still the essence of the artistic act.
Yeah.
So that was my main statement.
Yeah.
And I think it really relates to the practices we've seen.
And the performance ends up often being embodied and sensory and relational with bodies and space. And algorithms don't have those features.
Mm-hmm.
They're neither embodied nor they're sensory, and they don't exist in space. So, and they often don't have agency in the ways even generative AI systems, I would claim that there is no agency in these systems. We have the agency to sort of then enmesh them in our world. So it becomes an important question of when we get entangled with these systems, what do they offer us, and what kind of unexpected spaces or discomforting or speculative spaces do they allow us to create?
Maybe what's the desire we're trying to assuage by using these tools now to be a bit more like psychiatrical?
And I think what we share also with Vincent is like this idea that agency doesn't naturally mean control.
Mm-hmm.
That what I'm really interested in creating these performative spaces that I give a lot of agency to the sort of performative bodies, human bodies, but then again, the interface is very abstract and very strange and very sort of peculiar and queer in that sense that it doesn't really allow control in that sense that we usually expect from these algorithmic systems.
Yeah.
And I think that's a similar thing, is like you bring in the elements in your artworks that then, the entity of the artwork is not really in your control as an artist. And I think that becomes an interesting element that I, as a choreographer, I kind of let go of my control, of my power, of what the performance will be. And then in the moment of the performance, even the performers don't really have control. But it is a genuine co-constitutive thing that happens in that moment. And the interesting is that how do we reflect on that? What is the reflective space that makes us uncomfortable?
I think of the distinction between what you're doing on the staging as an aquarium, where you bring in marine life to then be in interaction, but they're still in the bounds of that space. Ultimately, what is their collective agency versus the agency of the person who's choreographed it? Whereas I think of sometimes Vincent's work as being in the ocean, where you have very little control of the organic ways that things are emerging, and the emergent phenomena can take a very long time. It's not even clear whether they will intersect in the ways that you imagine, and what kind of performative character emerges from those works. So they're very different scales and spaces how they're constructed. But maybe Vincent can reflect on this.
Yeah, I mean, I have plenty of things in my head. You spoke about mirrors, and I started to see a disco ball. I don't know, like activated disco ball with light and diffraction. And also when you said like agency is not control, but yet I'm very much into attention to details and aesthetic choices when it comes to materiality and kind of like what makes the material of the performance. So that's the challenges I was talking about. Like how do you also implement details and work on details and refine details, like kind of conventional artists refining details, and at the same time letting the situation maybe disrupt this detailing. So that's the tension I was talking about. And you asked like resonance. Like a resonance is not what is, you ask like what is resonance for you? And Anna and Jan replied, and I think I'm not using that term in the first place. This is not a term I'm familiar with. But I started my presentation by saying hi to the spectator, or like the spectators that are going to watch this recording in the future. So for me, when I started just to reposition my directing, being a theatre director, controlling this architecture with the theatre and this centripetal perspectivist logics of production of the stage, it was really a concern about temporality. I was really concerned by time ecology, because I was trained in a certain understanding of theatre that there's something happening on the stage here and now, in front of an assembly of spectators that are resonating at the same time with this stage object in front of them, most of the time at 7:30 in the evening in the theatre. And so that kind of like José Muñoz, queer theorist, says that the here and now is a prison house. And I started to work on that, starting to reflect on if I make a big hole in the back wall, like a Gordon Matta Clark hole in the building, and I let the hurricane or the climate change enter that resonating here and now. And then if I double it with algorithmic, as I said, storm or tempest or submersion, then that resonating now of the here might be just exploded into a dimension that I cannot deal with from my human perception and human history. And that was the resonance I was interested with when I started the doctorate 10 years ago. It was to shift from homochromic theatre, and I tentatively bring that notion of heterochronic theatre. Heterochronic, I borrowed it from Deleuze, and it's Deleuze Conference on Music. So Deleuze is addressing heterochrony as a compositional or musical dimension. So yes, resonance is how happens to kind of anthropogenic resonance turn into a more than human scale, temporality, even alien resonance. And how much, to answer your very first question, what does it mean? For me, it means to fail. But how do I kind of grasp the failure and turn it into something poetic, which is possible to share with the spectators in that mission impossible to resonate with that scale of resonance, if it makes sense.
Thank you, Vincent.
Disco ball.
Let's have our spectators join the conversation. So maybe we can pass the microphone. Tor will see if anybody would like to join this conversation, who would like to probe us further. Yes.
Hi. Thank you very much, all of you, for great presentations. I would like to maybe get you to open up a bit more on the participants. Of course, Vincent has sort of, I think, covered this, because in a way the participants are non-human and it's like the environment. But Hanna and Jan, but also Vincent, how do you, because to my mind, when I see your documentation, there is a sort of a direction going on in how the people are sort of meant to interact. And I was wondering, in these environments where there are like a number of people, obviously it feels like there is a right way and maybe there would be a wrong way to be present. And what are your thoughts about that? And how do you direct that with the situation? Because I sort of hear one thing and then I see another, and I'm sort of interested in that question.
That was directed to me.
Well, both you and maybe Jan, but all of you, but particularly maybe if you'd like to answer that.
Well, I think it's a peculiar because there is no right way, there is no or wrong way. It is purely improvisatory, and I mean, kind of in the question of, like, in the notion of failure, I think there's and success. There is always, particularly when we think about participatory audiences who are not used to performing or taking that performative. Of course, I'm very open to start with that where the people are kind of where they are taking part in, so they know where they're coming and willingly wanting to participate. Of course, that is a limitation, and that somehow maybe filters, or there's some sort of a filter who attends or who is willing to do that. But then the instructions are very minimalistic, and the sort of task is to just explore the space and figure it out collectively. But what tends to happen is that somehow what I call that sort of refer as a digital score, that how the interactive features are then sort of laid out, and how, what the system is, or how what is the model of interaction and sonification. There starts to be some sort of a collective ways of figuring that out, and there's a lot of kind of this kind of corporal interaction happening, mirroring and sort of counter mirroring and following, doing these sort of simultaneous collective acts where we start, which are in our human nature, how we do that. So we start exploring the system. Usually the movements that people do are very simplistic and very kind of day-to-day things. But it's not really, I mean, whatever emerges, that emerges. And then certain things starts to, there's this kind of like ritualistic or even something that is inherent to because we do share the same anatomics. I think it would be super interesting if we would have a chance to explore it more, or I would have a chance to explore and bringing animals and,
Because it
how would
appeared, I mean, as you said, this sort of mirroring aspect seemed to be very strong, that like one person does something and then another person sort of follows them.
But that is also the social kind of the urge to create a social community.
Mm-hmm. But in that documentation, it appeared that there is an audience as well, or not?
There is no audience. No.
So it's just those 6 people, or okay.
And I think that makes the difference, because I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about exercise-based art, community-based art, experience-based art? That the situation is the relational aesthetic kind of thing to experience, or are we talking? And in my case, I think the probably the tension comes from here. I have to confess that I still like artifacts, which is probably I play guilty here in this. It's probably contradictory with all the conceptual background I'm bringing in, but I still kind of like believe in the production of objects matters in the space. So the wrongness and the rightness for me comes like, what happens if I place an artifact that comes from this conceptual kind of triggering into a space and time that reduce it back to a certain modernistic, let's say, apprehension. So this is again a super strong tension, because as you could see in my examples, there are videos in exhibitions. They are like faux ceramic masks in the space. So I'm playing the game of the exhibited art, and I guess a lot of people could kind of provoke me on that contradiction with what I call like the out of perception resonance and the failing and so on and so forth. But I cherish the tensions, I cherish the paradoxes, even the contradictions, and I'm impure here, and I'm kind of, and I think I wish to share it with also the spectators, that they acknowledge, yes, okay, they are like different strata of apprehension of this work. And one of them is a possible reduction of it into what we call an art space moment.
Should we take one more question before we run out of time? One more? Yeah.
It was not for me.
Was there any other provocation people want to add?
Hi, thank you for the presentations. I heard at least Hanna and Vincent use the term queering in your examples, but I wasn't quite sure what you meant with that and how that is visible in the works themselves. Would you be able to elaborate on that a little bit more?
I can answer that. So when I started to work 10 years ago on repositioning, directing, and to shift it into redirecting, and I said I was very much addressing time ecology, and so I got like a lot of inspiration from queer theory when it comes to temporality. So meaning just to address queer temporalities as alternative temporalities and rhythms away from kind of temporal reproductive gendered take on temporality. So I could relate to that because I was in this moment when I was repositioning myself from the top of the pyramid of the theater ecology of production and organization of the stage. I was this probably male director on the top of the pyramid, and I said that I queered myself and my agency or my participation in making the work by kind of like entering this multi-resonating space that was inviting queer temporalities as deviant temporalities, as out of the normal, conventional time of theatre directing. So queering inherited operative modes of making theatre came mainly from queer theory and queer temporality, like Jack Abelstam or José Muñoz, or all those writers who have written beautifully about queer temporality. I think if I can continue to...
Maybe Hanna can also address that too.
Yeah, well, I mean, as discussed earlier, but I partly share this kind of queering the positionality of the choreographer or the maker. But also, I was referring in the presentation more of the queering of the computational, looking at the body, how do we understand, how do we model the body as a computational act, that I'm not referring to the sort of anatomical human body, but I'm just computing general movement in space, which is a very abstract thing. And then that allows queering of the thinking of movement as energy, and then mapping that into sonifications. And then that sort of shifts the how do we then perceive our actions reflected in sound, our physical actions reflected in sound. So they don't, they are sort of queered from that normalized understanding that, okay, this is how I have this quite sort of frontal like a dimensional body that we are very used to using and expressing ourselves with. But when we queer that mapping into sound, then that sort of shifts our perception of, okay, what does this gesture actually mean when it doesn't mean anything in this space? Why do I use this gesture?
I also wondered if there was something to do with identity politics occurring in these spaces where bodies are no longer functioning in a dichotomous binaries, but they're fluid. They're in relation, different kinds of relationalities. So is there some other queering that's happening in the performance?
Yes.
In that sense as well.
It's quite touchy question to answer, and thank you for asking it. It's a difficult question because I don't want to answer through personal or intimate prism or lens. I want to keep the position of not involving too much personal matters. I think it's also probably to consider minority, periphery, margins back in the game. And I think this is very much the queering agenda. If we do not keep queering limited to our sexual dimension, orientation dimension, and so on, but if we involve with identity politics, body politics, margins politics, I think the term queering is used as indicating this this process of reopening the center of the stage to historically, socially, politically overlooked species, bodies, orientations, matters. Why not algorithms? But yes, I would say this.
Yeah, and this I kind of like to refer more as feminist theories and kind of like feminist practices rather than queering practices, but in
it's like
in
the
term of
ecofeminism that you bring into
just like it's strong. I mean, it has kind of more evocative power than deconstructing, or I mean, there's something. Yes, there's an affect that comes with that term, which is powerful.
That also comes with the politics of doing research and making like kind of having attention or.
Which to me would combine the two questions we've had, maybe just as a very brief. I think a lot of it is in the framing. And we can't redefine our framing continuously, so this exploding, cosmic or scale. But I think the very lucid awareness of what the framing is that we implement, that's a queering movement as well. And I think even if then the format looks conventional, if the attitude behind it questions that, I think then it already achieves that, or fails, but in a constructive way.
It's about straightness also. It's kind of using a term that opposed to straightness in terms like when we speak of straight photography, this is something which is in the art history kind of identify straight photography like a decisive moment printed and put on the wall. So like straight theater for me is this kind of like a in vitro ecology of control, anthropocentric control. So what to put in front of straight, queer is quite operative terminology.
Thank you. With that, maybe we should bring a closure to this. With so many more questions that we could explore. But this is really fantastic, and I want to thank again Thor for organizing and bringing us all together for this second MAGICS event at Uniarts, and hopefully we'll have many more down the road. So thank you all for joining us, both online and on site.
You're so good.